All right, good afternoon. We're delighted to be joined by Matthias Schmale, as you know, is our humanitarian and resident coordinator in Ukraine, who's here for meetings in New York, and we thought it'd be good to have you here. So, Matthias, please go ahead. We have people in the room and obviously and online.
Great, thank you. Where do I?
Oh, it's taken care of for you. You don't have to do anything.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stefan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So a few remarks maybe in no specific order of importance. The first one is on the ground in Ukraine, and I travel around a lot, including to the eastern regions. It doesn't feel like we're anywhere close to a ceasefire. The war continues unabated, and there is really significant destruction going on the one hand of infrastructure in the energy side, which I'll come back to you in a minute, but also people's lives are being damaged, people are being killed and injured. So it's relentless in those terms. And there have been moments of cautious optimism. At the moment, I don't sense any optimism that we're getting closer to ending this terrible tragedy. I mentioned energy destruction. As winter has started, we are particularly worried about the winter. And the big worry is people potentially getting stuck in high-rise buildings in cities. I think we're doing quite well in terms of what we call winterization support as a humanitarian community, including the UN, reaching vulnerable people in rural areas. We are worried about the nightmare scenario of continued energy destruction and the recovery not holding pace with that destruction, and in the middle of a harsh winter, people getting stuck in cities, in high-rise buildings. We've had an example of this a few weeks ago in Sumy Oblast, Sumy region, where a city of 40,000 people was cut off for several days, and this was getting critical. The authorities were starting to think through evacuations of those people. Fortunately, that was avoided, but the nightmare scenario, as we are in middle of winter now, is as it were a catastrophe within a catastrophe. Then I want to speak about the fact that I've been in Ukraine a year and a half now. What has fascinated me, if that's an appropriate expression, is that while there's this horror of war, while the focus and a lot of my time goes into humanitarian coordination, development and recovery work goes on. And I'm sure for you as media and journalists, you would find plenty of interesting material in that respect. And allow me to give one or two examples to illustrate what I mean. I was in Kherson a few weeks ago in the south. Kherson itself, the governor told me every day there's been shelling this year, not a single day in 2025 without shelling. Above ground, it felt like a desolated place, empty of people, not much life, compared also to previous times. Then they took me to an underground maternity ward, rebuilt or built with European funding and the WHO colleagues involved. And you couldn't experience a starker contrast. Above ground, the horror of war; below ground, in the same place, helping women give birth to new life. And it sort of characterizes the defiance of the Ukrainians. Another example is underground schools. In Kharkiv, for example, they have converted parts of metro stations, underground metro stations, into schools, which I've visited. And again, it's incredible that after having come through COVID and now in the fourth year, nearing the end of the fourth year of this war, that children are back in schools. Not everyone, but very many children now in this fourth year are able to meet up in person and sit in a classroom with teachers. Then maybe 2-3 more points. One is still on this theme of humanitarian and development work at the same time, some interesting, innovative work of combining humanitarian demining with agricultural recovery. So again, in the middle of war, NGOs, government, UN support are demining agricultural fields, and then the UN, FAO, and others, WFP, are helping farmers back onto their land. So there is this hope that is being kept alive of a better future. Having said that, I think it's also important that we don't romanticize resilience. We speak a lot about Ukraine as an example of resilience, and it certainly is, and I hope the 2-3 examples I've given illustrate that. But of course, in year 4, the population is getting wary and war-tired, and we will have to see how that plays out. There remain red lines in terms of the future, such as giving up territory or elections in wartime, but people are getting tired, and that will influence whatever the receptance to whatever deal might come out in the future. Final point, it's also increasingly a technological war. You know, what really, when you go to the front line, there's of course a traditional ground war, if I may call it that, shelling and so on, but the drone war is the technological developments are incredible. I'm not a military expert, but it leads to different things, like the last time I went to Donetsk Oblast 10 days ago or so, we drove through kilometers of the road being covered by fish nets, basically, because that apparently avoids drones with cameras being as effective as they could be. But people I spoke to on the ground, so Humanitarian, we work with almost more than 400 NGOs implementing the actual services on the ground, many of them Ukrainian, and they really, that's what they talk about. Their biggest worry, the biggest threat to their work is drone attacks, targeting them very directly. So we have to see how this plays out. Again, hopefully, of course, the war will end, and I want to end with the call of our Secretary General. He's repeatedly said we need a ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire, for the sake of the civilian population. This carnage has to stop, so that all the recovery efforts that are possible can then really seriously take off.
Thank you. Volodymyr.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Schmale, for doing this briefing. I am a Ukrainian journalist, the National News Agency of Ukraine, Ukrinform. My name is Volodymyr. I've got a couple of questions I'll be asking one by one, if you don't mind. I have carefully read your highly informative interview for UN News in both English and Russian. In the English version, when answering the question about why some people remain in dangerous areas along the front line, you say they believe they must stay to honor those who have lost their lives defending the country. Putin's propaganda claims that Russia is liberating territories from Ukrainians. What would you respond to such statements?
So allow me, thank you for the question, allow me to clarify, as it were, that one aspect of why people stay is what you have quoted. There are other factors. I think it's important that I'm not misunderstood as the only reason people stay near the front line in danger is that they want to honor those who have fallen or been injured. I cannot really comment on what Russia is claiming is happening on the ground. I can just describe to you what I see on the ground. And what I see on the ground, as I said in my remarks, is continued carnage in terms of killing people, injuring people, and destroying vital public infrastructure like educational facilities and health facilities. And that just has to stop because it is not right and not fair. As our Secretary General again has repeatedly said, the full-scale invasion of 22 is a violation of the UN Charter and of the territorial integrity, and we need to find a way as international community of getting back to respecting that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Another question. In this interview to UN News, you said Ukraine is not a failed state. It remains a functioning state that continues to deliver services under extraordinary difficult circumstances. With this phrase, it seems as though you are countering Kremlin propaganda again. Could you elaborate on this idea a little? That is not failed state, I mean.
So what I had in mind when I said that is that many of us who've done humanitarian work around the globe have done so in failed states, where really the internationally supported humanitarian operation is critical for the survival of people. It is critical in Ukraine too, but in a context of government and services of government continuing to function. So the humanitarian operation is much more complementary to what government is able to do itself, notwithstanding the war. That's what I was trying to get at. This is not a state that has collapsed. It functions within the available means, of course under increasing pressure the longer this takes, but also as we as international community have to respect that it is normally the responsibility of a state to take care of the safety and well-being of its citizens. And in my experience of a year and a half, the Ukrainian authorities are largely able to do that. They do, of course, require very much the complementary supportive aid financed by the international community.
Yvonne, then Nemo. Oh, you have one more? Okay, one more, then we'll move on. Go ahead, just one more. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Vladimir. Sorry.
We see that due to the inability to advance on the battlefield, Russia has intensified its shelling of cities, apparently fighting some mythical nationalists. Have you ever seen in Ukraine any of the nationalists the Putin regime claims to be fighting?
I mean, you're asking me a very direct question in terms of have I seen any of this? No, is the answer. You know, Ukraine has over 30 million people, so I haven't met all Ukrainians. But in my dealings with authorities, with citizens, with NGOs, I have not come across that phenomenon.
Yvonne Murray?
Thank you. Yvonne Murray, RTE News, the Irish national broadcaster. My question is about what the view from the ground is with regard to the international diplomacy that's been going on, which seems to be characterised by the US putting forward a plan, often in consultation with the Kremlin, and then the Europeans reacting. What's the view of that in particular, and is the feeling there that the Europeans have done enough for Ukraine? Especially diplomatically. Thanks.
So a couple of comments. One is, as UN again, as resident and humanitarian coordinator, we strongly feel that you cannot negotiate the future of a country at war without the country being at the table. That's clear. So, and I hear that sentiment a lot. In terms of also skepticism of whether this can lead to anything, if in the negotiations with the Kremlin, if the two sides are not at the same table. So that leads automatically to a lot of skepticism of whether this is going anywhere. I mentioned earlier that I hear a lot about red lines that civilians, but also of course officials pronounce. And one of those is negotiations and deals cannot lead to the ceding of territory, whether currently occupied by the Russian armed forces of the Russian Federation or not. So there is this sense of defiance. You know, negotiations cannot, whether we are at the table or not. A red line is anything that has to do with giving up territory. Another red line, and you know, I'm quoting officials here, but I hear this also from ordinary citizens, is no elections during wartime. So with all the pressure the country is under, with the carnage that is being done, there's a strong sense of we want this to end, but not at all cost. That's what I'm hearing a lot. And to repeat, we need to be at the table when a deal is being negotiated. Your second question, is there a sense the Europeans are doing enough? I think international solidarity is valued, not just by the Europeans. From the Europeans, Canada is a big player, Japan, and a few other countries. So I have not heard anyone who has explicitly said to me, whether official or civilian, that the international community, including Europe, is not doing enough. There are, of course, a lot of worries. People realize the longer this lasts, the more it might also be difficult to sell substantial support at home amongst donor countries. So the worries are there about the future. It's not yet a sense that we are not being supported sufficiently.
Thank you. Namo, then Linda.
Thank you. Namo Abdullah with Ruda Media Network. Just one question. When you were in Ukraine, as you know, winter is approaching. I'm wondering if you have specific details about the reliability of heat and energy infrastructure. And could it get worse in winter? And if it does the United Nations have contingencies in place to help mitigate the impacts? Thanks.
So I think I mentioned in my remarks that we're very worried about the winter. I mentioned, so let me repeat, that I think as a UN system we are working with our humanitarian partners to support people in rural areas, particularly close to the front line. There's a lot of winterization cash support, as we call it, solid fuel, as it's called in Ukraine. So a lot of rural communities depend on heating with using solid fuel wood. So that, I think, is on track, and we're doing okay. We are underfunded there. We've so far reached 1 million people out of the 1.7 million that we set out to reach. So there is a part of the work I'm doing is to appeal for full funding of what we've asked for. But overall, I'm not so worried about the rural areas. What I'm really worried about is the cities, and I'm not the only one. I'm speaking for many cities like Kharkiv, Dnipro, and smaller cities close to the front line. The energy destruction is at a level that we have not seen before. They've always attacked the energy production and distribution facilities. In the last few weeks and months, it seems that that's really escalated, and that the level of recovery work, including supported by the UN, UNDP in particular, is not able to hold this at the same pace as destruction. So yes, I cannot give you more precise figures because it would be speculative. We are racing against time, doing the repair work as best as we can as an international community with the authorities. If the level of energy destruction continues and the winter becomes very harsh, and we have a repeat of what I described for the small city in Sumy Oblast, we will have a catastrophe within a catastrophe of thousands of people stuck in high-rise buildings without heating and water.
Thank you. Linda Fasulo.
Thank you, Steph. My question
Your
is...
microphone a little closer.
Sorry. My question has to do with yesterday the General Assembly adopted resolution, non-binding, as we know, calling on Russia to return Ukrainian children to the country. How significant is that in your view? I mean, what is your reaction to it? I mean, it's 3.5 years, but they did do it.
Yeah. What I can reflect a bit on is, again, what I observe and hear on the ground, living in Kiev and traveling a lot around Ukraine. Obviously, the children that are seen in captivity in Russia or abducted are a highly emotive issue. It matters a lot for all spheres of life in Ukraine, that there are children who are there are some orphans, but those who are not orphans, that they are not with their loved ones, but in the country that is seen as the aggressor and the occupier. So there's absolutely no doubt that for the Ukrainian politicians and population, this is a highly important issue, that the issue of children not in the country is properly addressed and that they are returned. And I think the sense I'm having from hearing from colleagues on the ground is it's appreciated that the General Assembly has given a strong message that it stands with Ukraine on this issue of children must be returned and live a dignified life in safety.
And is there also any, how much awareness is that, for example, the First Lady of the United States is also involved in this issue?
I mean, some will know that for sure. I don't think it's a big issue in country as to who does what. Because there's others involved, some of the Middle Eastern countries in the actual negotiations and the actual transfer of children that have returned. So I don't hear a lot of focus on individuals or on countries doing this. I hear a lot of emotional focus on our children need to return. Whoever helps us do this, that's a good thing.
Matthias, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
When do you go back?
On Saturday.